So you sent over quite a collection there, articles, reports, all focused on Larry Fink, BlackRock CEO, and some pretty strong opinions he's been sharing lately about the future of finance, global finance. And what really jumped out at me, the thing we really got to dive into, is this idea he's putting out there, Bitcoin. Could it actually challenge the US dollar? The dollar's been the big dog, the world's reserve currency for so long.
Yeah, no doubt. Your sources really hone in on Fink's recent letter to shareholders, lays out a vision. Pretty compelling, I got to say. Maybe even a little unnerving for some folks. What we're going to try to do today is untangle all that, see what's driving his thinking on everything from, well, the dollar, how stable it really is, to, like you said, these digital assets, Bitcoin being the most famous, I guess. And then there's this whole tokenization thing. Fascinating stuff.
All right, so let's just jump right into the deep end, huh? The dollar. Fink's warning about it. What's the gist? What's he really saying?
All right, so the heart of it, the thing that's got Fink worried, is whether the U.S. dollar can hang on to its top spot. It's the global reserve currency, right?
Yeah.
Lots of people just assume that'll never change, but he's saying, hold on, not so fast. The national debt, these deficits we keep running, they're putting that status at risk. Big time. And he goes back, way back to 1989. That's when that debt clock in Times Square, one, that's when it got switched on. And since then, get this, national debt's been growing 3 times faster than the whole U.S. economy. It's like we're digging a hole, a big one, but we're not building anything fast enough above ground to fill it in. Not a good look if you want a strong dollar.
Damn, 3 times faster. That's stark, man. And the numbers he uses in the letter to back this up, those are pretty scary too, right? Not just the debt we've got, but what it's going to cost us.
You got it. Fink pulls out some projections, and let me tell you, they're not pretty. Just this year, 2025, the U.S. government's on the hook for over $952 billion just in interest payments. That's more than what we spend on the entire military just to cover the interest. But here's the real gut punch. He's predicting that by 2030, all the stuff the government has to spend money on, plus these crazy interest payments, it could eat up every single dollar of federal revenue.
Every dollar. So nothing left, nothing at all for anything else the government's supposed to do. Sounds like a recipe for, I don't know, a total meltdown, right? And the whole world's going to look at the dollar and be like, nope, not touching that.
That's the worry in a nutshell. Fink reminds us, the dollar being the reserve currency, it's been good for America, decades of benefits. But he's saying loud and clear, this ain't something we're entitled to, it's not a guarantee, screw up bad enough, and we lose it. And, some of your sources pointed out this warning from Fink, it comes right when President Trump's been making all these policy changes, right? Adds a whole nother layer of what the hell's going to happen to the markets. Nobody likes uncertainty.
It's kind of wild how he ties those domestic policies to what could happen with the dollar globally. He's talking directly to the people making those calls,
Oh, yeah, no question. You can definitely read it as a wake-up call aimed right at policymakers. And for investors, it's like, hey, pay attention. This is how things could go south. He's connecting the dots, saying how we handle money here at home has a huge impact on how much power we have out there in the world.
Okay, so the dollar, maybe it's not so invincible anymore, and that's where Bitcoin comes in, right? Fink actually names it as a possible alternative if we don't fix this mess.
Straight up. He lays out this scenario, like, what if the U.S. doesn't get this debt under control? And Ganters, he says, they might start looking at Bitcoin and thinking, hey, that's actually safer than the dollar. And quote from his letter, it's pretty blunt. That same innovation, talking about digital assets, could undermine America's economic advantage if investors begin seeing Bitcoin as a safer bet than the dollar. Now, that's a big statement coming from the guy running the biggest asset management firm in the world. Not some crypto kid,
Definitely not. And it's worth remembering, one article pointed out, Bitcoin hit, what was it, around $110,000 back in January 24, before, Trump came back to the White House. Shows you how volatile it can be, but also how much more mainstream it's become. People are paying attention.
Exactly. That price spike, yeah, it shows Bitcoin's still got that kind of Wild West side to it.
Yeah.
But it also proves it's not some fringe thing anymore. And for Fink, a guy who's built his career in traditional finance, to even suggest it as a possible alternative, even if it's a what if the dollar crashes kind of scenario.
Yeah.
That's a huge shift how people are seeing things.
And it's super important to remember, a lot of our sources emphasize this. Fink's not some Bitcoin hater, right? He actually seems pretty optimistic about the tech behind it.
You got it. He says, flat out, I'm not anti-digital assets. What he likes is this thing called decentralized finance, DeFi. It's like financial services built on this blockchain tech, cuts out the middleman, the banks, the whole system. And Fink, he sees that as, and I quote, an extraordinary innovation. makes markets faster, cheaper, more transparent. His beef, and with the tech itself, it's more like, if we don't get our own house in order with the dollar, this new stuff could really shake things up in ways we might not like.
Right. So it's not that he's saying, hey, Bitcoin's going to be the next reserve currency, full stop. It's more of a, hey, be careful because this powerful new tech exists. And if we screw up our traditional finance system, it could come back to bite us. Kind of a warning shot, you know?
That's a really good way to put it. Very nuanced. He's not predicting Bitcoin's going to take over tomorrow, but he's definitely saying if the dollar loses its shine, Bitcoin could suddenly look a lot more appealing to a lot of people.
Now, let's dig into this extraordinary innovation he keeps talking about, DeFi, and especially tokenization. He seems genuinely pumped about that, right?
Oh, absolutely. DeFi, it's cool, streamlining how money moves around. But tokenization, that's where Fink really gets fired up. He just comes right out and says, every stock, every bond, every fund, every asset can be tokenized. If they are, it will revolutionize investing. Man, that's a bold statement. A whole new world of finance he's talking about.
Okay, so let's unpack that revolution. What exactly are the benefits he sees from this whole tokenization thing?
According to Fink, the benefits are potentially huge, like game-changing huge. First off, he says, markets wouldn't need to close. Imagine that. These tokenized assets, they'd live on this digital ledger, blockchain, whatever you want to call it. Trading, ownership, all that can happen 24/7 anywhere in the world. No more waiting for Wall Street to open, you know. Second, he says everything gets way faster. Right now, transactions take days to settle. All this back and forth between banks, clearinghouses. With tokenization, bam, seconds. Finally, he talks about all the money that's just sitting there frozen, waiting for things to clear. Billions, he says, billions stuck in this slow-mo system. With tokenization, that money's freed up instantly, gets put to work, could really juice the economy.
That's got to be so much more efficient than how things work now. That whole waiting for settlement thing always seems clunky, out of date. Like, come on, it's the 21st century.
Totally. And Fink, he doesn't stop there. He goes on to link tokenization with democratization. Basically turning assets into digital tokens, it opens things up for fractional ownership. So instead of needing tons of money to invest in, like real estate or some expensive stock, you could buy a tiny piece of it. Suddenly, way more people can get in the game, invest in stuff that used to be out of reach, maybe get better returns. He even says shareholder voting could get easier too.
So it's about making investing simpler, more open to everyone, a more level playing field, kind of like Robinhood did with stocks back in the day, but for way more than just stocks.
You got it. And to really drive home how big this shift could be, Fink uses this great analogy. He compares the current financial system, like the whole SWIFT network, to snail mail, the post office. Tokenization, that's email, he says. Instant, direct, way more efficient way to move value around, share information. Gets the point across, right?
Yeah, that's crystal clear. Now, it's one thing for the BlackRock CEO to talk about digital assets, but the cool thing is his company's actually putting money where their mouth is. Our sources point out some pretty big moves they've already made.
Absolutely. They're not just theorizing, they're building stuff. Look at their iShares Bitcoin Trust, ticker symbol IBIT. That thing exploded nearly $50 billion in assets under management, crazy fast. Several sources called it the biggest ETF launch ever, period.
50 billion? That's insane. Shows you how much demand there is for this kind of product.
Right. And the money flowing in, just in 2024, $37.4 billion net inflows, over $40 billion total since they launched it, totally crushing the competition like Fidelity's FBTC, not even close. But here's the really interesting part. Where's those money coming from? More than half of IBIT investors are everyday people, retail, not big institutions. And get this, 3/4 of them, they'd never bought an iShares product before. They're pulling in a whole new crowd, that's for sure.
It's like proof positive that Bitcoin, it's gone mainstream, legitimate investment now. And BlackRock, they're not just doing the Bitcoin ETF, right?
Nope. They've expanded, got Bitcoin exchange-traded products up in Canada, over in Europe too. Global strategy, clearly. But the thing that really shows where they're headed long-term, got to be their tokenized money market fund.
Mm-hmm.
BUIDL stands for USD Institutional Digital Liquidity Fund. But BUIDL, it's catchy, right?
BUIDL? Yeah, that's on purpose. I get it. Okay, so what's the big deal with this particular fund?
So BUIDL, it's a tokenized fund, invests in the usual suspects, cash, U.S. Treasury bonds, and repurchase agreements. Those are like super short-term loans backed by securities. When Fink wrote his letter, BUIDL was already sitting pretty at $1.914 billion in assets, and they're projecting it'll hit $2 billion by April next year. If that happens, bam, biggest tokenized fund out there, period. Fink's been talking about BUIDL as this bridge connecting the regular public markets with private markets, making everything smoother, more transparent.
So they're taking these old school, tried and true assets and putting them on the blockchain, making them into tokens. It's like that future he's talking about. It's actually happening right now.
It is. They're walking the walk, not just talking. This ain't just about Bitcoin anymore. It's about using this tech, tokenization, to change the whole damn game of finance.
Oh, and remember that time Fink said, what if everyone put like 2% to 5% of their money into Bitcoin? Price could go to like $700,000, he said. Now, that's a wild guess, obviously, but it shows you he's thinking big about the potential impact this stuff could have.
It's huge, what they're doing, what he's saying. But he also brings up some real obstacles, right? Like, before this whole vision can really take off, we got to figure out digital identity and the whole regulation side of things. That's a big one. You're telling me. Fink, he's a realist. Says, yeah, tokenization's amazing tech, but for the big players, the institutions, to really get on board, we got to have a rock-solid way to verify who's who online. Digital identity, got to nail it. He says, if we're serious about building an efficient and accessible financial system, championing tokenization alone won't suffice. Yeah. We must solve digital verification, too. It's like foundation. Got to have it before you can build the skyscraper. You know.
Makes total sense. Big banks, investment firms, they're not going to mess around with DeFi and tokens unless they know for sure it's secure, follows the rules.
Exactly. Right now, there's no like universal, everyone agrees on way to prove who you are online. So security's a question mark, regulations are a headache, and nobody really trusts the system yet. Fink's saying, look, for tokenization and DeFi to really win, the government's got to step up, figure out how to verify identity, make the rules clear, make the whole thing run smoother. He's calling on policymakers like, hey, get with the program, embrace the new stuff, but give us some rules to play by so we can actually build this thing.
So it's like tech guys in the government got to work together, build a system that makes sense, supports all this innovation, but keeps things safe too. Collaboration, that's the key.
100%. Fink gets it. Tech without the right rules, it's going to hit a wall, especially when you're talking about serious money, institutional money. Got to have both sides on board.
Okay, last thing. Fink puts all this into a bigger historical context too, right? How capital markets have changed over time.
He does, yeah. Talks about how these markets, they've always been about growth, helping people build wealth, all that. And he still believes in them, even with all the craziness going on in the world right now. He sees tokenization as the next step, natural evolution, making markets even more efficient, connecting the dots between public and private investments, things that used to be totally separate. His message is, this innovation stuff, it's not optional anymore. It's how we got to adapt, especially with all these money problems the U.S. and other countries are facing. Got to get smarter, got to evolve.
All right, so to sum it all up, Larry Fink, head honcho at the biggest asset manager on the planet, he's sounding the alarm bells about the U.S. dollar. Says the debt's a huge problem, could really screw things up long term. But at the same time, he's super bullish on Bitcoin, and especially this tokenization thing, thinks it could totally revolutionize finance globally.
Nailed it. That's the big picture. He sees digital assets playing a much bigger role going forward, partly because of these worries about traditional currencies, but also because this new tech, it's just more efficient, opens things up for more people. It's exciting, kind of scary too, you know.
It really makes you think, right? What happens to your money if Fink's right about the dollar? And if this tokenization thing really does become as normal as buying an ETF today, makes you wonder, what is money going to look like in 10, 20 years? What's the best way to invest? Feel like we're at this crossroads, and understanding how this old school finance world and the new digital world are going to mesh, that's going to be key. Thanks for breaking it all down with me. It's been a wild ride.